Great, thanks, David. It's great to be back here again with you talking about the Leliyn Graphite project. If you flick through the next slide, you'll just see that's our disclaimer, so please read that. The slide here, that's just a highlight of what we think we've got here. We've got a significant graphite discovery. We've been drilling for 6 months. We've got some really nice big intersections, over 200 metres at high grade, and we're only about 2.5 hours drive from Darwin. So we think it's a tier one project in a tier one location. Most graphite deposits aren't located in OECD countries. They're Chinese and West African, so we think we've got a good deposit here in a good spot. Now looking at the next slide, I'll just go through some of the highlights for the investment highlights we think that that distinguish us. We own 100% of the project. We've got 20 kilometres of strike length of graphitic schists. We've only been drilling 5 kilometres of that, so just be aware of that, and I'll go through the presentation that we're only drilling out a very small proportion of the total extent. We've done some petrographic section work as well on the diamond drill core, which indicates we've got flake graphite of a favourable size for the end product use, which we are aiming it to produce spherical graphite for electric battery use. The graphite market, again, based on the future demand for electric vehicles and the batteries within them, the graphite makes up a significant portion of those batteries, and that'll increase demand over the coming years for graphite. So I think you'll see positive response to that with the graphite price and supply and demand characteristics. And that couples in with that point there about China introducing export controls. They did that a couple of weeks ago, and they come in force on December the 1st this year. And that's export licenses are now required to export flake graphite and spherical graphite, which I'll discuss a bit later in the presentation. That's got important ramifications to the graphite market worldwide. And secondly, lastly, that point there was just a snapshot of the company corporate profile. I think the most important thing to take out of that is their enterprise value of about $11.5 million at the current share price. We think we're undervalued, and I think you'll agree with that when you look at the presentation. So just the next slide there, I'll go through some of the graphite market sort of characteristics there. That figure on the left-hand side, anode demand. The anode is what makes up the one half of an electric vehicle battery, and that's made up of graphite. So the demand for anodes is linked very closely with the demand for electric vehicles, and you can see that that graph going up and from years to come, and that's obviously based on electric vehicles becoming more dominant as years go by. And that graph on the right hand side there, the market balance. That brown line there going downwards shows the market deficit. So based on the current production profile and current reserves, there's going to be a significant deficit of graphite going forward. So we need a lot more mines and a lot more production to make those batteries to use in electric vehicles. Now looking at the next slide, you can see the electric vehicle, what's inside an electric vehicle. They're called lithium-ion batteries commonly. I think it was Elon Musk called them, so they should be called graphite batteries, because there's more graphite than anything else. You don't have an EV battery without graphite. It's an absolute essential requirement. And you can see there on that graphic there, a typical battery has about 50 kilograms of graphite in it, which is a fair bit. Now, the demand for EVs is increasing. You see there 8.4% of new car sales for the first half of this year in Australia for electric vehicles with that graphite in them. And by the next 12 years or so, major markets like China, the European Union and the UK are all looking at converting away from internal combustion engines to using alternatives, most of which will be electric vehicles with the graphite in a battery. So the demand for graphite is going to be very, very strong going forward. So where does that graphite come from? The next slide there just has a bit of a snapshot of the production profile of, on the next slide, of the graphite market. You can see there on the left-hand side, those red circles there and the elements there, critical minerals there, cobalt, graphite, gallium, things like that, lithium and nickel. They're all inputs into electric vehicles. Australia produces most of those. It's a significant or major producer. You can see on the right-hand side, the green circles of Australian production profile of those minerals. The big red circle there is graphite. Australia doesn't currently have any commercial graphite mines. So we make most of what's required in a battery, but we don't make graphite. So the next slide will show you where that comes from. And you can see there that this is a graphic that came out last week from Benchmark Miller Intelligence. China produces 67% of flake graphite and an incredible 99% of spherical graphite, which is a precursor to what goes in your car battery. So China dominates the market in graphite going into car batteries. The final one there, natural graphite anode, that's the final refined product, which is a purified spherical coated graphite. China again produces nearly 80% of that, with South Korea and Japan making up the rest. So you can see the market for graphite is very concentrated in one major producer, and the end use is really China, South Korea, and Japan. So the graphite export controls coming in are very important. That China is going to restrict, potentially, they have export controls on mined flake, raw flake graphite and spherical graphite. They're not going to require export controls on the natural graphite anodes. So you can see that sort of, they're trying to maintain their production dominance on the electric vehicle supply chain going forward. So there's obviously a fair bit of impetus there to diversify away from one market. We hope that our project will take part. So going forward to the next slide, I'm just discussing our project. As I said, it's in a Tier 1 location. We're about 200 kilometres south of Darwin in the Pine Creek district. Historic gold mining there, so there's a lot of infrastructure in place for the gold mining which has gone over there the last 100 years. The next slide will show you the infrastructure that's already in place. We're very close to the main north-south infrastructure corridor into Darwin, high voltage power lines, railway lines, gas pipelines, sealed highways, service centre at Pine Creek and at Catherine to the south, and obviously Darwin's not very far to the north. So it's a great spot to be doing business there. The next slide will show you a snapshot of the geology. And like I said, we've got 20 kilometres of strike length of graphitic schist. We've only drilled 5 kilometres of that, which is circled there in the black oval. So we've got considerable upside there to do more drilling to expand the potential resource there. You can see in the 6 months we've been drilling, we've drilled 53 RC holes, 11 diamond holes. We finished drilling on Sunday. So now it's a bit of rehab on site and getting ready for the resource estimation work. And we've also submitted samples for metallurgical test work, which I'll discuss a bit in a couple of slides' time. So if you look at the next slide, you can see there that the 6 months of drilling has produced some sensational results. And, you know, make no mistake, these are world-class results. You won't see results like this in many other projects around the world. 200 metres at very high grade at 10% is an exceptional result. And we've done several of those holes. And we've got a fairly good deposit here, we think, based on this. And you can see that picture on the right-hand side of some high-grade drill core there from hole 5. It's consistent high grade, and it provides a good start to get a decent-sized resource on this project early next year. So the next slide has a plan view of where the drilling has taken place. That's all the holes we've drilled this year. This year, you can see where the highlights of drilling. We've got high grades over at a 6 kilometre strike length. You can, the scale is the important thing here. You can see that 1 kilometre scale bar there, and each of those squares is 500 metres or half a kilometre. So this is a big deposit. The sections there in the yellow, sections 1 to 4, that is about a 1.5 kilometre strike length on those sections. And we'll look at those on the next slide. Now you can see section 1. Again, it's high grade, it's subvertical, outcrops on surface, and about 100 metres true width. So you can see there we've got consistent high grades at surface, and it's very amenable to any potential open cut mining. The next slide, section 2, shows you the same thing, good grades at surface and open at depth. The next slide shows the same. I mean, it gets a bit monotonous. The geology is so simple here, and it's so good. We're spoiled here. You don't get these sort of deposits very often, and this is a really good one. And that's the 285 metre hole. That's the best intersection we've had as far as downhole length goes at 6.1. And importantly, it contains a nice high-grade component there of nearly 80 metres at 10.5. So we've got all the components here of a really good deposit. And the next section is the 2 of our good holes as well. Again, high-grade at surface, open at depth, and it just really confirms the continuity and the potential, the tonnage and grade potential of the project. Now, I've got next to that picture there a thin section. You can see the scale bar there is about 0.5 millimetre, so it's quite small, but it shows the flaky nature of the graphite. And it's important to note that not only have we got flake graphite, but the petrologist has also indicated that the way it occurs there, it should be good for beneficiation. So when we crush it up to release it, it should release quite easily, and hopefully we'll get a nice high-grade flotation concentrate from that. It gets crushed, it goes into float cells, and it floats to the surface on the bubbles, and they're scooped off, and that's your concentrate. So that's the test work we're doing now, and we'll have results from that hopefully in the first quarter next year. And we're aiming at having some good recoveries and a good grade concentrate, which we can then go forward to do more advanced test work. So looking at the next slide, it just has a highlight there of what I've mentioned there, that the positive points of the deposit there: simple geology, outcrops on surface, high grade, it's wide, flake size amenable to be making our spherical graphite for battery use. The photograph there, you can see the outcropping graphite there. That's all about 10% graphite, that material there, outcropping on surface. So it really is a nice deposit. And going on the next slide, just has an outline of what we've done to date. We've finished this first drilling program. We've got some good results. That's sufficient data for a mineral resource estimation, which is commenced now. We're looking at finishing that next year. We've collected the initial samples for metallurgy. They're in the lab now being tested. Again, we're looking at those the first quarter of next year for the flotation recovery and the concentrate grade. We've got the thin section photography, which just indicates where the size of the flake, the size of the flaky nature of the graphite. We sample every hole, every 8 meters down the hole to get an idea of any variation in flake size and things like that. So the workflow going forward for next year, we're looking at, as I just said, the Maiden Resource in the first quarter of next year, March quarter next year. We'll do some infill drilling after that to upgrade that to indicated, and we'll do some more advanced metallurgy test work next year once we get the results from this first batch to assess the suitability for the spherical graphite for EV battery use. And the last slide there going forward is just reiterating what I said at the start. It's a significant graphite deposit. We know it's got scale based on the drill results. It's in a fantastic location. And in the next 6 months, we'll have a resource out. We'll also have the initial metallurgical test work out. So we're really looking forward to getting those numbers out to the market earlier next year and seeing a re-rate of the deposit or of the company going forward. So just watch this space, and I'm looking forward to releasing those numbers soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Great presentation. Can we just go back to the macro? So you were talking about the changing situation in China, sort of the EV battery market itself. What are you seeing from a macro point of view, and what are some of the recent changes that maybe investors missed when you're looking at what's happening in China and what they're certainly doing around their own critical minerals development, but also what's happening in Australia from a critical minerals point of view?
Well, look, I think China's ahead of the rest of the market by a long way in some of these things, especially battery minerals. Lithium processing and graphite processing. The world realizes now it has to catch up. I suppose any supplier will say that you can't have all of your supply coming from one source. There's always risk with that. And given the increased demand for graphite going forward, every major economy in the world wants to decarbonise and obviously phase away from internal combustion engines to EVs. So you've got to have graphite for that. And having it from one source always has potential issues. So I think obviously China wants to maintain their market share. Anyone would in that situation. And they're a very cost-effective and advanced producers of these sorts of things. So it's up to us to catch up. The Australian government and state governments have got critical mineral strategies and battery mineral strategies as well to create some of these materials here. And like I said in the talk, Australia doesn't produce graphite, and it's a vitally important component of a battery. It doesn't work without it. So I think we'll get a lot of support, from the government going forward to try and get this project off the ground. We can prove up the metallurgy. I think it all goes well for a nice project there because it's in a great location.
Talking of support, both state and federal, what does support look like, and when do you think it activates?
Oh, look, it'll activate when we're more advanced than what we are now. Look, we haven't got a resource yet, so we've got to prove we've got something here that we can work. So once we get the test work for the metallurgy, once we get the resource, our next step is, as I said in that last slide before, was to do more infill drilling, do more test work, just to confirm the viability of this, to produce spherical graphite for battery use. And then, there's various government facilities there. Most of it's in the way, of low interest loans, long-term loans, things like that, to get these projects up and running. I suspect once we get a scoping study completed, the next step obviously is to assess the economic viability to go to construction. And that's when you'll get some of those government loans and whatever involved at that stage.
Now, I may be looking a little bit too far ahead, and I'm definitely not trying to forecast or put any words in your mouth. But from an M&A point of view, what we've seen, particularly in the lithium space, is the end users, the manufacturers, the battery suppliers have moved right down the production curve. So go back 10 years, they were only ever looking at companies that were at BFS, DFS, or even in production. Now they're looking at companies that are very, very early stage, in a lot of cases without resources, but certainly significant size projects. Do you think that's an opportunity on a graphite level, given what you've said about the amount of graphite needed in EV batteries and the amount of supply that is needed and isn't yet coming online? Do you think that interest from a M&A point of view in the lithium space may pivot towards graphite?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. There's graphite's just as necessary as lithium in a battery. If you want to go down that battery minerals route and be a supplier, you need to have graphite as well. I think graphite has been a bit lost in all of the recent market interest in things like rare earths and lithium. I think the Chinese decision to start their export controls might be a catalyst to change that, I think. And also going forward, the EV market is picking up in Australia. China's had a slow start from COVID. I think that when their economy picks up and the demand for EVs goes up, that'll increase graphite demand. Once the price starts moving, then I think you'll see that M&A activity. So we're looking forward to being part of that, because our timing is perfect for that. We'll have a resource and metallurgical test work, so have the information to show people what we've got.
Now, we've got a couple of very specific questions come through from people who are watching, who clearly the company is on their watch list. We'll be able to include the dam exclusion zones in the initial mineral resource estimate.
Look, I hope so. That's probably a question more directed at the resource geologist. We have an independent resource geologist there. I've discussed that with him. We've got there were 2 dams there that we agreed with the landholder we wouldn't drill around, because obviously in the dry season the cattle require that water from the dam, so we didn't want the rigs to be scaring them off. I think on one of the dams, the gap in between the drilling is okay for inferred resources. There's another gap on the larger dam towards, I guess, the south or the east of the deposit, which is probably too big to breach that gap as far as resources go at this stage. But we've been very fortunate that an historic hole which was drilled by Fundalara about 7 or 8 years ago, we've managed to source that in Pine Creek. I think it was in their old yard in Pine Creek. We've managed to get hold of that hole. It's in good condition. It's been stored inside for the last 7 years, and that's in that area which we call the exclusion zone, the quarantine zone for one of those dams. So we're sampling that now. That'll provide information in that area. So we hope to get a bit of the resource going into that area as well. So I don't see those exclusion areas as being anything significant at this stage, because we will negotiate with the station holder to drill them at some stage when it suits them. We're looking at early next year when it's still a bit of water lying around, so we can get in there with the rigs for about 2 or 3 weeks, drill the holes, and we're out. So that's what we're aiming at this stage.
You got a question here about gallium. Didn't really touch on it in the presentation, but how's the gallium sort of piece forming, and are you seeing any consistency across the ore body?
Oh, look, it's very consistent. There's gallium throughout the whole thing. It's averaging around that 15 ppm mark. Again, it's not being highlighted because it's not the focus. The focus is the graphite. When we do the metallurgical test work, we'll assay things for gallium as well to see where it sits in the flotation chain in the test work there, and we'll look at seeing if we can get a concentrate not only of graphite coming out of it, but also maybe a concentrate containing higher levels of gallium. So at this stage, it's a byproduct, not the focus. But obviously, there's potential there to have a decent byproduct out of it. But we'll see how it goes with the test work going forward.
Now, this might be a little bit ahead of time, but certainly a good technical question. At this stage, are you able to approximate the level of large flake in the deposit, i.e. percentage, and what may be expected for PSG use?
Look, we've had no analysis of the flake size apart from the thin section work, which just gives you an idea of maximum size flake and maybe average size flake and things like that. I think we've had flake sizes up to nearly 300 microns measured in some of the thin section work, but the average is lower than that. The average may be around 80 to 90 or thereabouts. So the test work which is being done now in the lab, I think they will come up with a size distribution of that sample there, which will give us a bit of an idea. But I don't think at this stage we're going to have this massive jumbo flake or coarse flake deposit. I think it's going to be more finer flake. which is nice, amenable for that micronization process, then spheroidization process to make the spherical graphite for batteries. So, there's still test work to go. So I can't really answer that with any degree of confidence at this stage, apart to say that we've got a lot of fine to medium size flake.
Last question. You yesterday put out some drill results. What was the context? What did they tell you, and where to from here?
Well, that was that. Yes, we put results out yesterday morning for a few holes. We still got about 3 diamond holes to go, and we finished drilling on Sunday. So those holes, that was 285 meters at about 6%. So that really, again, just solidifies the broad nature of the mineralization and the continuity of it. It just highlights the fact that this is a large deposit. It is continuous, and the drilling is really showing that up. So it's going to be a nice resource estimate when it comes out, I think, based on those numbers. So it really just solidifies that. We've got a few more results to come back, as I said. They'll be back within the next, let's say, 6 weeks. So in 6 weeks' time, we'll have all the results back. We can start doing the resource work in earnest then and get cracking on that. And I'm looking forward to having those numbers out to the market as soon as we can.
Thanks, Richard. Great presentation, great company, and clearly a lot of news flow to come and some big catalysts early next year. So we follow with interest and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
No worries. Thanks. Yeah, good to be here, David. We'll talk to you again next time.